Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and I wanted to do another video on MK Ultra and its victims, but specifically the victims from Canada, from Donald Ewen Cameron, who I'm going to argue in this really ended up being almost I wouldn't say modern day because these experiments took place in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but an extension of the Mengele type science, the Nazi type science that we have all condemned and heard about in history. I mean, that's what this was. And I'm going to give props here because this is not the same footage that I've been going over. I've actually got a wrap-up video I'm going to be doing where I show you just how extensive the CIA was at this point and where they were pervasive, electrodes in the brains of animals to remotely control them. That's all a real thing. And like I said, we're going to be following that up in another video. But in this video, we're going to go to a CBC Fifth Estate piece. And we're going to begin with one of the victims you've seen in the ABC piece I've gone over. The woman who was actually the wife of a member of the Canadian government. Because one of the reasons I'm doing these videos is because there's some kind of crazy misconception that really all this was the government testing LSD out on the lower rungs of society. And morally, I think that's reprehensible anyhow. Drugging any member of the populace. There's a reason that we have the Constitution and Bill of Rights. We're all supposed to be created equal, right? We're not supposed to be abusing one another. We're supposed to be trying to help and empower one another. So that at its level would have been horrible. But when you see who some of these victims were, it blows that narrative out of the water. So we're going to begin with the wife of the Canadian Member of Parliament, I believe. So let's get to her story. And again, her story is much, much more extensive in the other video we've done. I believe it was the second victim video.
I don't think we'll have radishes this time, okay?
Some of the most brutal drug and electroshock treatment was administered to Val Orlico of Winnipeg, the wife of New Democratic MP David Orlico. Mrs. Orlico had come to Cameron for treatment of depression after childbirth too, and the treatment almost destroyed her life as well.
When I first went home to Winnipeg, I attempted to take my own life because I couldn't endure the way I felt. And I have a chronic need. I'm very dependent on other people. And I have a chronic depression, which at times gets worse.
So let's stop it there. She goes in for a type of depression. And again, this woman was given all sorts of unbelievable treatments. Apparently, she didn't have to go to the sleep room very often. So what's the sleep room? So the sleep room is where depatterning took place. Depatterning and psychic driving were probably the most abusive methods that we know about. And the sleep room is when they would sometimes even induce you into a coma. You'd be comatose, being drugged with barbiturates and all sorts of other things. Yes, LSD was in there. But as you're going to find out, other drugs like PCP were also used. And not only were you being drugged, induced into a coma, but you were also listening to recordings again and again and again of the same thing or some kind of a message. And remember, in Iraq, it came out that we were actually using that kind of methodology where in Guantanamo Bay, where prisoners were forced to listen to Barney recordings over and over and over and over and over again. Okay? So let's get to this next woman. She does not appear to be, again, what we have been projected as these victims. Again, this is McGill University at the Allen Institute, and all of this is under Dr. Ewan McGregor, and Ewan McGregor's accolades we'll get into after we see some of the victims here, so we can understand how prominent he was. I mean, this guy was world-renowned, looked up to, so much so that when we get to yet another victim, it was actually somebody who came to work for him. Not somebody who went to him to be treated, But again, somebody who came to him, trusted him, and said, "Oh yeah, why not do some of these treatments?" But let's get to this woman.
Jean Huard of Montreal went through the same chamber of horrors. She had come for treatment of common depression after childbirth, and that treatment destroyed all of her plans.
Not being with my family, not being able to follow a career, not being able to study anymore, which I wanted to do very much. I would say it cost me my life.
Yeah, and it cost a lot of people their lives. In fact, again, this is an old CBC piece. There are people still fighting today. In fact, they put out a documentary in 2017. At the end of that, we actually went over an article in May of 2018 in the last MK Ultra video we've done. And when we talk about why, they can't function in society, there were times he wiped 6 to 10 years of their memories. So I want people to think of that for a moment. When you wipe somebody's memory and they have no recollection of what they've done, have they been made to do things involuntarily? That's a really good question. And in probably the final video where I go over a lot of the victims and the series, you're going to find out, George White, who was the right-hand man of Sidney Gottlieb, who was the head of the American version of this, and he seemed to oversee even Dr. Ewen Cameron, although Ewen Cameron clearly was the head out in Canada, and all these victims are his. George White wrote how he raped, murdered, and pillaged at the behest of the government, all endorsed, all signed off on. How often do you get to do the joked about it? And the stories of him are absolutely abhorrent.
Robert Logie of Vancouver, another victim, was depatterned. He was injected with LSD, put to sleep for 23 days, hit with the massive electric shocks, and brainwashed with the recorded messages.
I've never been able to sleep without medication since the sleep treatment. I went through years and years and years of severe depressions. I dream about it. All my waking hours, I think about it. It's eating me up.
Attracted by...
Now, this woman is someone who came to work for him, and we're going to get to her in a moment. But when we talk about the electroshock, I always go back to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. If you've not seen this film, first of all, it's amazing, it's excellent, but it certainly harkens to that time period where it was acceptable to shock someone's brain. And, obviously the victim that we just saw took some serious electroshock treatment. But after we talk about this woman who came in and, again, was there to study with Ewen Cameron, as you'll see, kind of in awe of who he was, well, let's just play. Let's play her story and then get to the next one.
By Cameron's reputation, Dr. Mary Morrow went to study psychiatry under him. Instead, Cameron persuaded her to become a patient at the Allen. He drugged her, shocked her massively, erased 10 years of her memory, and even today, she has difficulty remembering some names and faces.
A woman who is a doctor who came to study with this man because of his accolades. You just hear what he did to her?
To ignore all principles, all medical ethics and medical principles. To use one of his own colleagues, me. How low can he get?
My father was a 49-year-old Montreal businessman who...
And that man he's talking about is a man named Lou Weinstein. Now, to give you some background on this man, his name is Harvey Weinstein, obviously not the Hollywood mogul, but a professor of psychology at Stanford at the time, and went into the medical industry because you're going to find out a horror story about his father and what was done to him. Okay? And because of this horror, this man was completely motivated to try and figure out what they had done.
Who was successful and dynamic and whose life was destroyed by a series of treatments. He was someone who became anxious for a relatively short period of time, who went to get some help, and whose life was totally shattered by the experience.
His father was one of the more than 50 patients treated here at the Allen Memorial Institute under a secret program designed to develop brainwashing techniques.
And by the way, the Allen Institute, just so people understand, look who they're funded by. Oh, okay. The Rockefeller Foundation. The Canadian government also involved, the CIA, the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. But it's always odd that the Rockefellers and their foundations always have their hands in these type of odd ops there. And, you know, you can read more about exactly what was going on and the funding and the doctors involved outside of Cameron and the Allen Institute, and a lot of articles out there. This one's really good by The Guardian. And I got to be honest, I have not seen this latest one by the Fifth Estate. I was unaware about it until I was looking into some stuff to do today. I'm going to check that out. Now, let's go back to this footage so people can understand what was going on here.
He went in one winter evening and was put to sleep for approximately 2 months.
2 months. 2 months. Think about the sleep room, de-patterning, psychic driving.
He was given shock treatments of various kinds, gradually building intensity to an intensity and a frequency that was not certainly the routine or standard of the time.
At the Allen, the shocks were administered not 2 or 3 times a week, but 3 or 4 times a day for weeks on end. Patients were reduced to vegetables. It was called de-patterning. And on top of that, the patients were given dangerous experimental drugs.
He was given a whole slew of drugs.
Let's stop, because again, we always hear about LSD. And if you've seen my previous MK Ultra stuff, I talk about the CIA, psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, kind of projecting that into society. Even people like Timothy Leary giving the CIA credit for kind of bringing this in the counterculture. But that's far, 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 far from the only drug that they used. Watch as this man rattles off a slew of drugs that they gave his father.
Including amphetamines, likely PCP, insulin comas, barbiturates of all kinds, LSD. He was then forced to listen to recorded messages. At the end of the time, my father was someone who was unrecognizable to me or to anyone else in the family or his friends. He was someone who could not function in this world, whose perspective didn't extend beyond the next 5 minutes, who had no recollection of the past, and almost no recognition of the present.
Now let's stop here before we get to Cameron and his accolades and everything else. There are a lot of people, as you saw, that made almost full recoveries, which would, to me, suggest that there was some kind of a success in at least some of his patients, right? If you were able to induce an amnesia of half a decade or a decade with a person having no idea what they've done through drugs and trauma and electroshock, and then kind of come back around, that is part of this mind control experiment. Now, obviously, it looks like a lot of these people were reduced to vegetables or had just terrible experiences afterwards. But again, when you have trauma-based therapy, when you're electrocuting people, when you're giving them all sorts of drugs on a whim, when it's not to treat them in any way, but it's to use them as guinea pigs, what do you expect? So again, look how prominent Cameron was. Here we go.
These are the days and hours are the occasion.
Cameron had a worldwide reputation as chairman of McGill's Department of Psychiatry and president of both the American and World Psychiatric Associations.
And it is his mind, no less, which may destroy mankind.
Well, I suppose it could be said to have originated.
It wasn't as though Cameron didn't know what he was doing.
Of course he did.
The Allen Memorial Institute itself were founded. They were
Dr.
both
Cameron
founded
was
in
present at the Nuremberg
1943.
trials. So I find that for someone who in 1945, 1946 was involved in evaluating and considering what the Nazis had done to helpless people in concentration camps, was 5 or 6 years later invading people's brains.
But again, what do you expect when the United States, after World War II, takes in a bunch of Nazi scientists, not just for the rocket program, but across the board for intelligence and experimentation, and then incorporates them into our intelligence system, the OSS into the CIA. This is what you get. So it doesn't shock me that he was at those trials and watched what had happened. And he probably thought to himself, well, I want that one, and that one, and that one, and that's an interesting study. And let's get moving. So take a good look at this family. This is the man right here whose life they shattered and made this young man grow up to become a psychologist so he could find out what happened to his father.
For the victims and their families, time is running out. Harvey Weinstein's father is 79 now and failing.
I think it's important that that people understand what was happening to these Canadians and to my father in particular, because you hear words like depatterning and psychic driving, and those are the words that Dr. Cameron used in his papers, and they sound very clinical, but don't give one a sense of the horror of this
project. So, folks, we are going to continue to bring these to you. And I think that I may even do one more tonight if you're watching this live. So stay tuned. And look, we just saw all these victims. This was the Canadian sect. There were tons of sub-projects. We still don't know the extent of these programs and what really happened after supposedly MK Ultra disbanded. Because if you believe that it's all over, think again. In fact, I'm going to talk about how they were even talking about gene editing and that manipulation. That can get into what is known as chimeras or human-animal or animal-plant hybrids, you know, on a lot smaller levels. I know people think of the science fiction stuff, but you look into how many of these things actually exist, and again, the Central Intelligence Agency's involvement, and it's some interesting stuff. Folks, if you enjoyed this video, you're watching it for the first time, please hit that subscribe button, ring those bells for notifications, share this stuff on social media. We hit the 15K mark. We're rolling. We're running to 30K. I want to hit 30K. We can do a lot more with 30K. I'm trying to expand this channel as much as I can. Just about everything I've done this week has been demonetized, including my expose on Nexium and the Rainbow Cultural Garden being shut down, and my John Wilkes Booth / Hitler video. So bizarre. I mean, what can I talk about if I can't talk about history, not only, 40, 50 years ago like this, but literally over 100 years ago in the Civil War era. Thanks, YouTube. I really appreciate it. But with your help, we are going to continue to make these videos. So again, please share this stuff. Check out my other work over at We Are Change and Pulse Change. And once again, guys, thank you so much for joining me.